We need to talk about extremism and political violence. Also, TikTok is for sale and there's plenty of nonviolent political developments. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join a majority. This is Majority 54.
Well, Jason, last week we were mid-pod when the news reached us that Charlie Kirk had been shot, and we didn't have complete information back then, so we, out of an abundance of caution, decided to wait until after the pod to learn what was happening, and obviously we learned that he died, seems instantly, and what I didn't share on the pod was that while we were talking, I got the message from our producer saying that Kirk had been shot. I went on Twitter to try to figure out what was going on. And while we were talking to Joe Kennedy, I was searching for what had happened. And at that point, and I don't know if this is still true of Twitter, but they had the video of the assassination. So I'm sitting there while we're talking and I'm watching as they had pretty graphic stuff there. And I was like trying to think about, like, do I just stop the record and say, no, I actually think something really like seismic just occurred, but I was honestly in shock. I'm glad we spent some time thinking about it before we came back to our audience on this. And that's a roundabout way of saying, before we get to the details of what we know and the response to all of this, I figured I'd give you a chance to respond now that you have complete information, or at least more information than we did when we were interviewing Joe.
Yeah. Well, first, I had heard that was all there was on Twitter at that time, and so I, up until this point, have been able to avoid seeing that video because I just personally, it's not. I've seen enough of that, and didn't need that, and so I have not done that. But still, last Wednesday, a week from today, like I just felt sick all day long, and I felt that way for a couple of days, at least. And I think obviously the idea of things getting to a point in our politics and in our inability to speak to one another in this country to where political violence is becoming more common obviously had everything to do with the way I felt. But on top of that, while I disagreed on probably everything with Charlie Kirk, he was a political figure, and a human, and I think what really worsened the way I personally was experiencing all of it, in addition to just understanding this is a human being who's somebody's son, who was a father whose kids are not going to have him for their entire lives, pretty much. On top of all that, it was really when I said that on social media and then was subjected to 2 days of people who ostensibly agree with me about most things. About 50% of the people responding negatively are the people who agree with me on most things, who felt that I had an inadequate level of hate for the person who had just been murdered. And then the other half from people who I guess hate me all the time, blaming, our side of things for it. And it just made me feel really depressed about America, on top of just feeling awful for the fact that someone was murdered. So it's just awful in every way.
It reminded me of when we responded, I think over 2 or 3 weeks, we responded to the Luigi Mangione, killing of the United Healthcare CEO. And we said then, and over the course of a few weeks, we reaffirmed our opposition to political violence and murder, which shouldn't, I didn't think, I didn't think it had to be controversial. And we got tons is probably an exaggeration, but we got a significant amount of backlash from people who claim to have been longtime audience members. And that surprises me that somebody would have listened to our podcast for a long time and then would be surprised that a podcast about having discussions with people who have different beliefs than you, and you and I both have people in our lives who have and continue to vote for Trump, that we would somehow have any other opinion. And that wasn't even about Trump, not Trump. That was just somebody who happened to work for a healthcare company that I think most of us can agree had, not been conducting itself well. But my point back then was that one could lob that argument at almost every aspect of the healthcare system, including Mangioni's own family, who runs nursing homes, and for which he was living off of the profits of a business that has lots of ethical concerns. One could say probably a lot more than United Healthcare. So my point was, this is not how we engage in these discussions and debates. And that assassination did nothing to further the cause of healthcare reform or to change United Healthcare or any other healthcare company. And so what just happened is a father and a husband lost his life, and a bunch of people, seemed like from both sides of the political spectrum, satisfied some level of their taste for blood. And I was thinking about that this week when I saw, on the one hand, some people on the left, I would say most people in my life, reacted to it the way that you and I are. But there were some people posting things that I very much disagree with. And then I happened to go on Facebook because I was looking for something, and I saw a bunch of my friends from Staten Island I grew up with basically advocating for political violence against quote unquote the left. And I'm like, okay, we have crossed some line at this point. And I don't know if we crossed it the past week, but it certainly has become obvious that we're in a different phase of American history here.
Yeah. And or maybe a repeat of an old phase, which we were fortunate to get out of, right? In the late 60s and early 70s. And it's really frightening because I don't know if this was I don't think this was a part of the last, it was before we were born, but this aspect of, after violence like this, waiting to find out what the political views of the killer were, because on the same day that Charlie Kirk was assassinated, I know there are people in the audience, I've heard from them, who don't like it when I use the word assassinated, but I don't know why, because he was a political figure who was killed. And the evidence now seems to be pretty clear he was killed for his political beliefs. As awful as I think his beliefs were, he was killed for them. He was assassinated. The same day, you have a shooting at a school in Colorado where it appears that the views came from the other side, from this killer, which means it feels like every mass shooting or piece of political, it all feels political right now. And I think one of the things that made me feel as sick as anything else is, even within myself, I can feel myself wanting to learn what the identity and the views of the killer were, because I guess even somewhere in my brain, I thought I was going to get some sort of affirmation or relief from finding out one way or the other. And of course, it turns out, and we could get to this in a moment, but it turns out the views of the person who assassinated Charlie Kirk are what you would have assumed they were, which is they would have been somebody who would have voted for the same people we would have voted for based on their views as of late. And I hate that we're in a place where we're trying to prove ourselves right or wrong by assigning blame in these situations, as opposed to trying to figure out what we do to stop this from happening.
Yeah, well, let's start with what I think is a key piece of evidence, which is an exchange between Tyler Robinson, we could say alleged shooter, but it's pretty clear he was the shooter, and his roommate. And this is being read by, I think, the Utah authorities.
Roommate, you weren't the one who did it, right? Robinson, I am. I'm sorry. Roommate, why? Robinson, why did I do it? Roommate, yeah. Robinson, I had enough of his hatred. Some hate can't be negotiated out. If I am able to grab my rifle unseen, I will have left no evidence. Roommate, how long have you been planning this? Robinson, a bit over a week, I believe. Remember how I was engraving bullets? The effing messages are mostly a big meme. If I see notice bulge UWU on Fox News, I might have a stroke, all right. I'm going to have to leave it. That really effing sucks. I'm going to turn myself in willingly. One of my neighbors here is a deputy for the sheriff. Again, you are all I worry about, love. That came from Robinson. Roommate, I'm much more worried about you. Robinson, don't talk to the media, please. Don't take any interviews or make any comments. If any police ask you questions, ask for a lawyer and stay silent.
So I play that because, I've seen on the right, because now there's been this whole back and forth about what was the right's response to Minnesota and yada, yada, yada. And it's clear to me that a significant portion of the right is convinced that the shooter in Minnesota was a leftist because that person had worked for Wells. And so they have bought into some kind of, I think, clear misinformation from what I understand. And I don't want us to repeat that. Like, I think the available evidence is pretty clear that this is a person who was motivated to shoot Charlie Kirk out of a opposition to Kirk's views, almost certainly, if we're simplifying things, from the left. And that's not the fault of the left, but I think that is a fact that you start from. His mother also told investigators that Robinson had grown political and left-leaning over the last year, becoming pro-gay and trans-oriented. His father said similar things. Both parents identified their son for the authorities and were key to tracking him down. The roommate who we mentioned before seems to have also cooperated fully with the authorities. So it seems like all the people in his life, whether left or right, when they realized it was him, have cooperated with authorities. And we can get to what the response has been from the Trump administration, but I think we just start there and say this is a really unfortunate, to say the least, situation. And the facts are what they are.
Yeah, and there are going to be, I'm sure there's people in the live comments right now. There's going to be people in the comments everywhere that the show goes up doing the score sheet and letting everybody know how many more acts of political violence have been committed by the right than the left. And I will just say, like, yeah, I think you're probably right.
We'll get to some of that data, but only as a response to what I think is a obvious overreach. But I'll be clear about what I think the use of that data is in a second when we get to it. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and my point is simply, like, it doesn't really matter, and I feel like, you can spend all your time blaming one side or the other and trying to assign blame, but that's actually not going to do anything and this is, the Trump administration clearly doesn't understand this and doesn't care, but that's not going to do anything to curb political violence. We have to talk about what the root causes are, what the solutions are. For me, the root causes are pretty clear and they're very hard to solve for, which is that, so much of our political discourse is driven by algorithms now, and it is built for radicalization, because anger and hate is what breeds engagement. I mean, I'm sure you and I both see the same thing, particularly on X, which dials it up, from what I can tell, more than anything else, in the sense that, like, when I post something political on, X, formerly Twitter, the first hour is people who follow me, basically just in calm, supportive agreement. And then after about an hour, the algorithm takes that and serves it up on a platter to people who don't just disagree with me about my politics, but have a tendency to angrily disagree or angrily agree with people who disagree with me. And then I'm subjected, I'm sure this happens to you too, to 2 consecutive days of threats and heinous comments and disgusting, gifts and all sorts of stuff. And it's because that's what drives the platform. Now, I'm not sure how you solve for that, but what I also think is that it makes it an even more of a fool's errand to just try and blame one ideology or the other, when it seems to me that it is the technology that is putting this stuff in front of people over and over and just feeding it to them, and until they're completely overweight with it.
Well, let's go through a few layers of this, starting with the law enforcement response. Kash Patel, the director of the FBI, in the immediate aftermath of this, said, "We got him." And the problem was, this was before they actually got him. They had somebody else in custody who turned out not to be the shooter. You and I have been talking for a while about how we're concerned that our law enforcement is being run by a bunch of social media influencers and clowns. And this is just one example of what happens when you have totally incompetent, unfocused sycophants running the major levers of law enforcement. This is him on Fox News, mind you, being asked about this.
24 hours after, when we were still looking for the guy, I know you posted that we got him. And that ended up not being true. You took some incoming because of that. What led to you posting that? Why did you feel so certain about it? And what do you have to say about the criticism?
No, I appreciate this opportunity. Look, as I stated, I was being transparent with working with the public on our findings as I had them. I stated in that message that we had a subject and that we were going to interview him, and we did, and he was released. The job of the FBI is not just to manhunt the actual suspect who did the killing or suspects, but it's also to eliminate targets and eliminate subjects who are not involved in the process, and that's what we were doing. Could I have worded it a little better in the heat of the moment? Sure. But do I regret putting it out? Absolutely not. I was telling the world what the FBI was doing as we were doing, and I'm continuing to do that, and I challenge anyone out there to find a director that has been more transparent and more willing to work the media on high-profile cases, or any case the FBI is handling, than we have been under my leadership.
He was telling people what the FBI was doing while he was at dinner at some fancy restaurant, had not left dinner.
There's just so much about this clip. I mean, he's been out there. Like, we have this testimony he's done in front of Congress, and we'll show one clip from that. But we could spend the whole episode on that. But he refuses to say, like, inaccurately saying we got him was a problem. That's where we are right now. I don't think there's much else to say there. I mean, he's a total clown.
How about the fact that he thinks that, like, apparently according to that clip, that the most important job of the FBI director is to go on television?
Yeah, he says to be out there working the media. That's the job of the
media.
FBI.
Yeah, because, you know, when I think about law enforcement, I think about how much TV time are they getting.
Yeah, and we're not going to go into this, but there's one small part we'll go into. But, you know, he's basically trumpeting his transparency at a time where he's doing everything but being transparent about the Epstein files. But
right.
We'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. Now, that's serious, but even more serious is the crackdown on various elements of the left or critics of the administration that has come on the heels of this. You know, you could start with certain employment-based crackdowns. The law firm Perkins Coie, who I've used before, I imagine you might have too.
Yep.
Carolina Panthers fired employees who made comments or posted online in ways that, as they say, didn't match their values. The Secret Service put an agent on immediate leave for a post that mentioned karma. There's a whole Home Office Depot thing that we'll talk about where somebody refused to print a poster for a Kirk vigil, lost their job. Now, I think these are different cases. We don't have to go through all of them, but obviously the Secret Service putting somebody on leave for posting about karma, I think is something that a lot of us could agree, depending on what the exact details there are.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in the Secret Service and you have any sympathy for someone who committed a political assassination, I think that is problematic in your job.
Yeah, there are other situations though, like there's this anonymous site that crowdsources tens of thousands of commenters' names of social media accounts, and it's leading to a witch hunt of people, and has gotten some innocent people, including this woman, Cynthia Ryberg, who's an associate principal from Wisconsin Elementary School, whose photo was being circulated, and she actually didn't post the thing that they said she did, and she got all this hate from people. And this would all be private activity that we could all debate. Is it right that Home Depot fired a person, refused to do this or that? And, you know, different people can come down on different places for this. I largely think private activity is private activity, but you know who doesn't think private activity is private activity? The Trump administration, who is saying that they want to go after these private entities for various things. You know, on the one side, they're saying they want to go after liberal nonprofit organizations. And the example they gave is the Ford Foundation and Soros, because they've backed The Nation magazine, which actually the Ford Foundation's most recent gift was 2019. But they're basically saying they're going after these entities because they have in any way supported people who didn't like Charlie Kirk, I guess is their point. But I think there was an even more nefarious version of this, which is Pam Bondi, who said that businesses have an obligation to print photos of Kirk for vigils. Here's the video.
That's horrific. It's free speech, but you shouldn't be employed anywhere if you're going to say that. And employers, you have an obligation to get rid of people. You need to look at people who are saying horrible things, and they shouldn't be working with you. Businesses cannot discriminate. If you want to go in and print posters with Charlie's pictures on them for a vigil, you have to let them do that. We can prosecute you for that. I have Harmeet Dillon right now in our civil rights unit looking at that immediately, that Office Depot had done that. We're looking at that. But Sean, you know.
Well, first of all, right or wrong, that's not what the law says.
No, and it's actually the right. This would be true no matter what happened, but they were behind the Supreme Court case with the bakers in I was going to say Kansas, but she would literally reach into the computer and strangle me if I said that. Shout out to our baker in Kansas. The baker in Denver or Colorado who refused to serve gay patrons, which is not the same, but that was as far as where the right was on religious freedom and First Amendment issues. And now they're saying you have an obligation to print posters of whatever political ideology we say you have to. And they've gotten some backlash from the right on this. I would say not nearly enough, but Matt Walsh wrote, "Get rid of her today. This is insane. Conservatives have fought for decades for the right to refuse service to anyone," which, by the way, it's quite a sentence. We won that.
Yeah.
We won that fight. Now Pam Bondi wants to roll it back for no reason. I just want to pause for the humor of, like, look, we all were in school reading about the Freedom Riders and the lunch counters in the Deep South and all that. And I just got to imagine if you're Matt Walsh and you're just like, you're now an adult and we're kind of the same age. And it's like, he's just eagerly writing, "We fought for the right to refuse service to anyone." And I'm like, well, okay. At least you're being consistent on this issue.
Yeah. Also, but as a sidebar to this, I feel like incorrectly, but still the case, the right wing seems to think that they have won everything so much that some of their influencers can only continue to build clout by picking fights with fellow members in the right wing. And so I think that's part of why we're seeing that so much, but go ahead.
No, yeah, we could spend all day on the contradictions of the same people who went after Bud Light for merely sending a marketing package to a trans person. Like, I mean, we don't have to like map out the logical problems with all of this. Trump, that's Bondi, and it's actually really safe to criticize Bondi, right? That's fine within the right. What it is not safe to do is criticize Trump, who essentially said the same thing. Here's a clip of Trump being asked about Bondi.
That'll come to a vote, but we'll see what happens.
And what do you make Pam Bondi saying she's going to go after hate speech? Is that, I mean, a lot of your allies say hate speech is free speech.
She'll probably go after people like you because you treat me so unfairly. It's hate. You have a lot of hate in your heart. Maybe they'll come after ABC. Well, ABC paid me $16 million recently for a form of hate speech, right? Your company paid me $16 million for a form of hate speech. So maybe they'll have to go after you. Look, we want everything to be.
So that's Trump. And, just so you know, Jason, Trump also announced a $15 billion lawsuit against the New York Times for articles he didn't like this week as well. So, people could be like, he's just being funny with the reporter. First of all, he's actually mentioning a successful lawsuit he's lobbed while defending his attorney general, who's talking about prosecuting people over their speech, while also in the same week launching a $15 billion lawsuit against the New York Times. There's more, but I'll pause here to give you an opportunity to weigh in before I talk about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, he's threatening them. Like, there's just no, actually what he said is far more aggressive than what she said. A reporter asked him a question he didn't like, and he was like, "My attorney general should go after you." That's not okay. Like, that's not just like, oh, Trump. That's not okay. Now, all that said, like, we can complain about that all we want. It's only going to get us so far,
Yeah, I'm really torn about what to even say or do about a lot of this whole package of items, but there's actually more, believe it or not, that happened this week. The deputy attorney general got in on the action. This is Todd Blanche, formerly Trump's personal attorney, still probably his personal attorney. I don't know, but he said he plans to go after organizations behind the protests against Trump at a DC restaurant. Let's get to this video.
as you know, RICO has been used to go after like Al-Qaeda, MS-13, the Gambino family. How would something like that protest fall under a RICO charge?
That's not what we use RICO for only. RICO is available to all kinds of organizations committing crimes and committing wrongful acts, not just organized crime or ISIS or terrorist organizations. And so it depends. So is it, again, sheer happenstance that individuals show up at a restaurant where the president is trying to enjoy dinner in Washington, D.C., and accost him with vile words and vile anger, and meanwhile he's simply trying to have dinner? Does it mean it's just completely random that they showed up? Maybe, but to the extent that it's part of an organized effort to inflict harm and terror and damage to the United States, there's potential investigations there. And that's what the president was saying yesterday in the Oval Office, and what he also has said in the days before that as well.
But were those women in the restaurant inflicting harm or terror or damage by protesting the president of the United States? I mean, they were just shouting basically in his vicinity.
I mean, repeat what you just said. I mean, honestly, so you're asking whether there's damage done by 4 individuals screaming and yelling at the president of our United States while he's trying to have dinner. That can't be a serious question. That cannot be a serious question. I mean, it's true that there's a difference between shouting and committing an assassination,
there were supporters outside,
which is what happened to Charlie. Well, it depends. There's nothing wrong with peaceful protests, and nobody has ever said so. Of all the people in this country, President Trump knows exactly what it's like to have people protest against him. But what he's talking about, and what the administration is talking about, is organized efforts by individuals who are not present at the protests, but they're funding these protests, and they're not protests. They're inflicting damage and harm and actually assaulting officers. They're damaging vehicles, and that's the conduct that we're trying to stop.
Well, I mean,
nobody's saying going after peaceful protests. You literally just said that. And then he just throws in randomly something unrelated to what he's talking about at the end, which is people assaulting officers. Obviously, those people will be arrested. And he seems to equate, like, he seems to be like, okay, I've gotten myself into this bind because I'm talking about speech, and I got to at least pretend that there's something more nefarious going on. So I'm going to talk about people who fund speech. So essentially his argument is maybe you're okay if you say unnice things to the president, although it's not that clear from this clip because he seems to think everything's harm. But even a generous reading is like, okay, maybe you can say certain things, but you can't be organized about the things you say. Right. If you're actually like planning for where you're going to be and like maybe there's some money involved and you travel to places, that is illegal, according to Todd Blanche. Now, what law he's basing this on? No, I have no idea.
Well, there's one more thing that he introduced there, which is yelling at the president is harming the United States. He's very careful to in every sentence to equate the president's experience / political fortunes as synonymous to the United States as a whole. And yeah, what he's talking about there is criminalizing political organizing, is saying if anybody was involved in funding any or just anybody involved in making some phone calls to say the president is at this place, we should protest there, then now they're terrorists. That would be news to every single person that we were taught to admire in the civil rights movement, in the anti-war movement, in the suffrage movement, in the abolitionist movement, right? I mean, they were political organizing, and somebody was helping fund the logistics.
I mean, we can talk about this forever. I have 2 other just quick quotes here to keep in mind, and I think this is specifically on the question of where our political violence comes from. And the reason why I share this information is because the talking point on the right is that this is a problem, political violence, that's unique to the left, and they're using that as a pretext for a lot of the things that we're talking about, including, by the way, designating the Ford Foundation and Soros as terrorist organizations so that they could strip them of their 501c3 status. This is a real thing that's being pondered right now. And here's the real data. And we know that this data is important because the Justice Department removed the study from its website, which found that, quote, the number of far-right attacks continues to outpace all other types of terrorism and domestic violent extremism. This is a 2024 study. The Cato Institute analysis of murders by political ideology since 1975 finds 391 of those from the right, 65 from the left. The Economist broke this down by year. So one would say, oh, maybe like that was true of the entire, 50 years period of time. But what about recently? You can look at it year by year, and the Economist all says the same thing. Let's take a break, Jason. When we come back, we're going to talk about how a lot of Trump's friends are buying up key media assets, including TikTok, and then a whole host of stories, including more Kash Patel and some troubling signs for Trump on the economy. When we get back.
This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss any of the excitement this season on Prize Picks, where it's good to be right. I'm so excited to see Patrick Mahomes take the field this season. I'm thinking that in this game coming up against the Giants, he can throw for a few touchdowns. I know that Ravi just wants to troll me during this ad so bad, but sorry, it's my live read. Prize Picks is simple to play. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. If you get your picks right, you could cash in. Prize Picks is also the best way to get action on sports in more than 40 plus states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. Prize Picks invented the flex play, which means you can still cash out if your lineup isn't perfect. You can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. Prize Picks is the best way to win cash this football season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your takes into cash all season long on Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to win cash while watching sports. Join millions of users and sign up today. Download the app today and use code MAJORITY to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code MAJORITY to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Hey, Robbie,
right.
before we actually get into the next thing, I want to say something about the last segment, which is, and I put up like a way too long thing on TikTok and Instagram about this. And it's something you and I have talked about in the past, but like, I continue to believe that we need a robust conversation in this country about universal service, because I don't have a technological way to fix the algorithmic radicalization problems we have. And I don't have a First Amendment friendly way to regulate that technology, or, I don't have solutions to those sort of things, but I do know that you and I have both had the opportunity to serve others and to be in public service, and to do it in a way where you are exposed to people who are not at all like yourself, didn't grow up like yourself. And it's what it was for both of us in a formative time in our lives. And I tend to believe that it is, whether you're talking about left or right influencers or ideologies, I think it's why or even radicalization of another kind, I think it's why we tend to be a little bit more inoculated to that sort of thing. Because speaking for myself, when I think of a person who, like a Charlie Kirk or somebody like that, it's extremely difficult for me to dehumanize them and not see them as a person. And I think that's because I served with every type of human in the Army. And I don't think that means that everybody needs to serve in the military, but this is, as I've said before, the longest consecutive period in American history without some form of mandatory service. And there's a million different things you can do to serve your country. But if you spent 2 years between the ages of 18 and 27 around people who were nothing like you and doing something to make the country better, you'd be more vested in the country as a whole. And it would be a lot harder to radicalize you into seeing only people from your side of an ideological spectrum as human.
We should talk about writing something for like the Atlantic or something about it. I would do a piece with you if you want to.
That would be fun. I'm in the middle of maybe writing something for the local paper here because they asked me to, but that would not preclude that. And I would love to do that.
Cool. All right. Let's talk offline about that. There's no easy way to transition to this, but TikTok, I mean,
it actually is a perfect segue. So we're talking about algorithms and.
Well, Trump has been slow rolling this ban on TikTok, which like somehow we got to the place where Trump, who has been the big China hawk, seems to be awfully soft on China in a lot of ways and doing exactly what China wants. Now, you've got this negotiation over the future of TikTok. He keeps moving the deadline from which TikTok would be banned. Now it's being announced that there is a group of 3 companies / entities that would take a controlling stake in the U.S. Part of TikTok. And those are all 3 companies run by people very close to Trump: Silver Lake, Andreessen Horowitz, and Oracle, who are all run by very Trump-friendly donors. And they would have a controlling stake. There's fine print here that we could talk about to the extent people are interested in. And they would create a new version of the app and move users over to it. But as Matt Iglesias tweeted, this is what he tweeted. He said, so the terms of the TikTok deal are the CCP, meaning the Chinese Communist Party, gets to continue programming the app with no oversight. So we gain nothing in terms of security or manipulation. Trump allies get to capture the financial upside, total sellout of the national interest for corrupt purposes. It's essentially where we are right now.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how to put a nice spin on it, but we are gliding toward oligarchy, and it, as tends to happen in authoritarian oligarchies, it will include, the people who, metaphorically buy ink by the barrel, except now it's not ink, it's the digital space where the influence happens. And I wish I had a solution for it. If I had billions of dollars, I would make a bid.
Yeah. Well,
many billions.
Oracle is run by Larry Ellison, who's a close ally of Trump. His son bought CBS, the company that owns CBS now, and is installing his people there. There's rumors that he's going to take over CNN as well. So these are being consolidated, these media properties, in the hands of people friendly to Trump. And
but can I say, not all of those people have been historically friendly to Trump or his cause, and we don't know. With the Ellison thing, I mean, if you follow that deal closely, you don't know how much of that is, this is what we have to do in order to be able to make this merger, versus ideological. It's hard to know. But what's scary is, at some point, power vests at such a level that it may not matter, right? If that's the cost of doing business, is allegiance to, the ruling administration, you're in the same place either way.
Yeah. Well, there's something I think potentially even more worrisome that happened that's related. And this has to do with the United Arab Emirates, who is getting access to high-powered chips manufactured in the U.S. that the U.S. Used to be stingy about. We wouldn't let countries like China or UAE, et cetera, get access to these chips. That has changed, including with China. But the timing here is rather suspicious. Here's a video from CNN that lays it out.
Tonight we're learning about 2 multi-billion-dollar deals involving the Trump White House, the ruling family of the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, and World Liberty Financial, a cryptocurrency business co-founded by the Trump family and the family of Steve Witkoff, a close confidant of the president who's also his Mideast envoy. The New York Times reports that in one deal, an Emirati investment firm deposited $2 billion in World Liberty Financial. Shortly after, the administration granted the UAE access to advanced AI chips. Now, the Times says, quote, while there's no evidence that one deal was explicitly offered in return for the other, the confluence of the 2 agreements is itself extraordinary. Taken together, they blurred the lines between personal and government business and raised questions about whether U.S. interests were served.
I don't know, man. This is not one of our more inspirational podcasts.
Yeah, I mean, this is you take the wildest fantasies and wet dreams the right had about Hunter Biden, right? Which that story was Hunter Biden was cutting deals abroad and somehow was given Biden, Joe Biden, part of the take. Obviously, that last part was never, ever established, and we're now could be certain is not true because of all the attention it got.
Yeah, it turned out what was true was that he was using his last name to try and get himself into, positions
to make thousands of dollars.
Right.
And this is a private citizen who deserves whatever scrutiny he gets, but it never implicated Joe Biden. And if it did, it would have been thousands of dollars. And of course, it didn't implicate Joe Biden. We're now talking about another week, another $1 billion transaction. by the guy who's supposed to be our Mideast envoy, but somehow also has a company that the UAE is invested in. Who knows whether Trump has any involvement in these companies or not? It would be like the 30th of such transactions that we've seen. It seems like other countries understand that they can play our country by throwing what to the UAE is a relatively small sum at the president's or the people around the president's personal financial arrangements.
You know, like when you talk about putting people in positions where they stand to be enriched, what I think is maybe even more troubling than the abuse of power of it is this implied assertion by the Trump administration that their conflict of interest is what makes them an expert. It is their qualification, right? That's the crazy part about this, right? It's not, hey, they should be disqualified from this because they stand to be enriched by it. It is they are active in this space and therefore they are an expert and the best person to serve the country. And if they make some money along the way, I mean, that's not a problem. That's just the cost of doing business. And do you know, there are many, many countries that work that way in this world, and we generally consider them to be corrupt. Like, I did anti-corruption, work as an intelligence officer in the Afghan government and military. And that was a place where, in order for us to work with the local government that we had helped set up, you had to accept a certain level of corruption. And it was always this game, this like cost benefit analysis of like, well, we know they're going to be a little bit corrupt because that's like how things get done here, but are they really competent? Because if they're really good at their job, we have no choice given the talent pool to accept a certain level of corruption. And like, that's the direction we're heading right now in this country. And it's just discouraging would be not enough of a word.
Well, I'll skip. We've had a lot of Trump on this, so I'll skip this next video. Trump was just asked about this and got super feisty and defensive about it with a reporter. But let's do a rundown of some other stories we got here. One is just the economy generally, which seems to be really struggling. There was a report out by Bank of America that showed that the wage growth for the lowest third of Americans is the lowest it's been in a long time. And simultaneously, the top third seems to be doing just fine. Harry Etten had some data on just how Americans feel about the economy. Let's go to this clip.
What are we talking about here? U.S. economy is getting worse. This trend line is no bueno. In November of 2024, when Donald Trump was reelected, it was 42%. Look at where we are now, up to 56%. The clear majority of Americans believe that the economy is getting worse. Less than a third think that the economy is getting better. This is a very, very troubling trend line. And of course, as Matt was talking about, what are the top concerns for Americans at this particular point? The top issue for you right now, hello, what's number one on your list? It's inflation. It's 34%. The economy, 16%. You add the two of those together, that is a majority, 50% of the American public who say either inflation or the economy is the top issue for them right now.
So that's the economy. There's this, you talk about inflation being a major concern. We just got news that the Fed cut the interest rates. Obviously, Trump's putting a lot of pressure on the Fed. We'll talk about that in a second. So you've got a lot of inflationary pressures. We've got the tariffs going on. You've got the immigration crackdown. And I thought there was one notable example here where ICE rounded up Hyundai workers who were here legally in the U.S. to outfit a plant in Georgia and sent those folks back to South Korea. We're going to play like a small part of a clip. We don't have it. So basically there was this clip of South Korean workers being like, hey, like they arrested me for no reason. And now don't think I'm going to come back, even if I can go back to the U.S. It's just embarrassing where we are.
And these workers, by the way, I mean, the reason, and look, I'm not a fan of like economic models that force this sort of, bringing folks in instead of training them here. But it is the reality of that. From what I read, it was a decision by Hyundai to bring these people to the United States rather than bring U.S. workers to South Korea to spend, lots of money and lots of time training them and then sending them back. I guess you could say that there's some economic benefit to disincentivizing companies from doing that. But it's important to remember that this is not a U.S. company. Like,
Right.
I mean, I say this as a guy who we only buy American cars and made by union workers in this family, but you have to be somewhat practical about the fact that it's a Korean company that is sending the Korean people here with an expertise that the workers here don't currently have. How are you going to ask any foreign companies to make investments that will actually employ lots of Americans? They may not have employed them in those roles, but they employed them in many other roles. Like, you're really disincentivizing that kind of investment in the country.
Well, a couple other sort of lightning round issues here. Trump says, or truth, that there will be a midterm convention. I don't think there's much to talk about there, but something we can keep on our radar. I was going to play 2 videos in this, but I don't think we need to. If we had more time, we could talk about what's going on in Poland. Russia sent some drones that way. Trump just seemed totally disinterested in this when asked about it. He was also asked about whether he would start strikes on mainland Venezuela and didn't rule it out. There's also been, I think a lot of our audience would have noticed a major incursion into Gaza. And so what we have is the so-called anti-war president here, who, as we've established in past weeks, struck a boat that had turned around from the United States. He's done nothing to stop the war in Ukraine, and in many ways has enabled Putin. Hasn't done anything to stop the war in Gaza, and now seems to be talking about war with Venezuela, and killing people who are actually going in the opposite direction in the United States, no matter what they were doing. So that's just where we are. That's our anti-war president, Donald Trump. Back to the FBI director, Jason, Kash Patel, testified in front of the Senate, and this was the most petulant testimony I have ever seen. We don't have time to get into all of it, but there was one notable example here where Adam Schiff asked him about Maxwell's prison transfer. Let's go to this clip.
She's transferred to a minimum security prison not suitable for a sex offender like herself. She's transferred to a minimum security prison not suitable for a sex offender like herself. Who made that decision and why?
The Bureau of Prisons.
The Bureau of Decisions made it in
Prisons.
The Bureau of Prisons decided on their own, without any consultation with Blanche or anyone else, that they were going to suddenly, after this interview, completely unrelated to this interview, completely unrelated to anything she said, move her to a prison not suitable for a sex offender. You want the American people to believe that? Do you think they're stupid?
No. I think the American people believe the truth, that I'm not in the weeds on the everyday movements of
you're
inmates.
Not in the weeds?
What I am doing is protecting this country, providing historic reform, and combating the weaponization of intelligence by the likes of you. And we have countlessly proven you to be a liar in Russiagate, in January 6th. You are the biggest fraud to ever sit in the United States Senate. You are a disgrace to this institution and an utter coward.
I'm not surprised.
I'm not surprised that you continue to lie from your perch and put on a show so you can go raise money for your charade. You are a political buffoon at best.
Man, I've had the sounds like a humble brag, but it has a point. It's, by the way, it would only be a humble brag to this audience and the bunch of nerds that we all are. I have had the chance over the last 3 years to get to know Adam Schiff a bit, like had a couple meals together. And the guy is a lot of things, but a lot of good things, by the way. I don't mean he's a lot of bad things. I mean, there's a lot of aspects to the guy's personality, but showboat and like grandstander is just not one of them. Like, of all the, look, I know Kash Patel and his acolytes believe all that right-wing conspiracy stuff that they were saying about Adam, and we don't believe it, and we could put an argument against it, but we've all heard it. But like the end of it, like, did they really believe like it's just a political show by Adam Schiff? Because if you spend time with Adam Schiff, or if you watch him on television, like, the guy doesn't come across at all like a guy who just needs attention. Like, there's plenty of people like that in politics. Adam Schiff is just a guy who courageously follows evidence. And that right there is as animated as Adam Schiff gets. And he was getting shouted. He was getting shouted over. So it's an odd.
Astonishing just to see, I mean, there's so much about that clip that just makes my blood pressure increase. But the one, the tone, everything about it, but at the root of it is an inexplicable act involving somebody who committed some of the worst crimes you could imagine. That Kash Patel, previous to being the FBI director, seemed to claim there was a cover-up involved in it. Now he seems to be the one perpetrating the cover-up. So all this theatrics, as much as it bothers me, at root, we still don't have an answer. And the next question I hope would be, okay, well, you're not in the weeds. You previously to being FBI director seem to be really concerned that there was a cover-up involving this woman and Epstein and a bunch of other people. Can we move her back now to the other prison? Right. You have that authority. Can you commit to do that right now? Let's move her back to the other prison. Why not? Is there some kind of agreement with her? Why can't you move her? She's under your authority,
I'm sure the answer is like, well, the Bureau of Prisons, it's very important that it maintains its independence. Which should be funny because we don't believe that about the FDA or the DOJ or anything like that, or the Federal Reserve. And also because I don't want the Bureau of Prisons to have independence. I don't want people who incarcerate people to not have oversight. That doesn't seem like a good thing at all. I don't know. You could just tell, he talked like he'd been got. He turned on him immediately and started shouting over him because he has no answer for that.
Well, two other lightning round issues here. Yulia Navalny, who's Alexei Navalny's widow, said that they tested samples from his body, and surprise, 2 different labs came back, said that he was poisoned. So not much we could do about it from here, but just confirmation of what we suspected there. And then one final piece here is Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, had 2 homes listed as primary residences and mortgage documents at the same time that Trump alleges Lisa Cook from the Fed did the same. Important to note that the Wall Street Journal did some reporting that seems to suggest that maybe she did correctly list her residences, but we'll see how that shakes out. So, surprise, Jason, it seems like the Trump administration might not be consistent in how they're approaching this scourge of mortgage fraud we have with government officials.
Yeah, apparently, yes. Man, today has been it's just been a depressing week in the news. This is why, and this sort of segues into our one for us. This is why now when I see people like socially, and they're like, "How are you doing?" And it's just, "How you doing?" Most of the time, my answer is, "I am doing great," when you adjust for current events, because it just is how it feels. It's like, I can have all sorts, and there are all sorts of wonderful things happening in my life, but if I'm paying attention to current events that day, it's very difficult to feel good. And I bet that for as much of what we've said during this episode that a lot of the people in our audience may not have liked, I bet that is something that everybody is feeling at the moment and has for a while.
Whew, yeah.
So you're out of the country right now.
Yeah,
and
man.
I'm wondering how that feel like. You're out of the country learning to cook. You're in Italy learning to cook.
Yeah.
And yet your job, both through this podcast and the other things you do, is to maintain a connection to and even broadcast about and opine on American politics and those current events that I'm adjusting for. So I'm just wondering how that dynamic plays out in your day.
Yeah, I've thought about retiring from it all for sure, but obviously I haven't. Part of the reason why I'm here is I just wanted a break from doing it as much as I had been doing the commentary. So now I compartmentalize and do it way fewer than I did before. It is weird. I mean, I'm having a great time out here, and I'm like way less like wired in than I normally am. But it does creep up, like, like I'll have these conversations where it's very hard to describe what I do for a living. So then inevitably politics come up, and then people want to share their views. And, I run into a lot of people who don't share our views. And there's certain ways that kind of comes across that can be annoying, but I've become adept at avoiding it. But I think I am trying to like approach the issues with a level of depth and long-term thinking that I haven't been able to when I've been way more in the weeds daily. And so I'm trying to ask like bigger questions while I'm out here, and I'm working on a couple, books and longer term pieces. I'm trying to focus my energy there every time I get frustrated or concerned about things. But it is eerie to be away from it while all these things happen. Yeah.
You know what? For me, last week, you had 2 shootings on Wednesday, and then of course you had all the things that were said afterwards, and I mean it was divisive is nowhere near enough of a word. So I guess I would I don't know what the word is, but whatever that word is, it's one of the most polarizing or whatever days in America in a while, in a long while because of that. And what was, and I talked at the beginning of the show about because I posted about it on social media, I got all this incoming really negative stuff, and it had me in a really bad headspace. And I went and, I played amateur wood bat baseball with a bunch of guys. Like I play games on a couple nights a week, and I had a game that night and these guys are like, at this point, they're like a grown-up fraternity. I mean, or really it's like when you're a kid and you have a little league team and that's your tribe. I mean, I'm fortunate to have that as a man in his 40s. I have, about a core of about 10, 15 guys who I just see a couple times a week during the summer and often during the winter. And like, we have all sorts of different backgrounds and political views and all sorts of different socioeconomic backgrounds and everything. And after a whole day of like people who are on the left side of the aisle feeling like my hate was inadequate, and people on the right side of the aisle making sure I knew what hate felt like on the receiving end, I get there and, it's of course something people are talking about, particularly to me because, I'm their friend who's involved in politics. And it was, it didn't make me feel all the way better by any stretch, but it was a little bit of a relief from it to realize like, oh, my friends who are very Republican and who I'm sure listened to Charlie Kirk often, and my friends who have views much more like mine, everybody was depressed for the same reason. Like when you get offline and you go into the real world, most, at least the Americans I was around that night, and these are like men, not all of them white men, but enough of them white men to where it's like the demographic where you would think like, it might be more like the online hate when it wasn't like that. It's everyone's like just really worried about the country if this kind of thing is happening, and they were just really down about it. And I realized like the people who don't agree with me on politics had the exact same emotions that I had, and that was mildly reassuring.
Yeah, man. Well, hopefully we get a sunnier few weeks. Well, to listeners if you want to follow my journeys here in Italy, I've started a Substack where I share non-political stuff. So this is like the whole cooking experience, but also reflections on a bunch of deeper issues unrelated to Italy. And so you can go to realravigupta.substack.com, and we could put it in the show notes too. But realravigupta.substack.com, you could subscribe for free. And I post a couple times a week just about things that are unrelated to politics if you want to escape from the politics.
Yeah, which is a good thing to do. I found myself rewatching Friday Night Lights this week just to escape from things a bit. So, all right, thanks everybody for listening. You can find Ravi's Substack where he just said, what is it, realravigupta.substack. And you can, and he's also everywhere else at Ravi M. Gupta. I'm at Jason Kander everywhere. Please leave a 5-star review for this. Thank you to the Midas Mighty. And remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.